Today, I am so fired up for Michelle MACE Curran. So let me give you a little bit of background. MACE is the second female to fly lead solo for the legendary Thunderbirds. She is a top motivational speaker. Her children's book comes out in June. She's a 13-year career F-16 fighter pilot. She's the founder and CEO of Upside Down Dreams. And I've said this now for a while, she literally has the best content on LinkedIn. I don't know how the hell she does it, but she puts out insane content all the time. And her stuff on Instagram, Mace, I love that too, but I feel like I'm going to throw up most of the time when I'm watching your videos. Your content is incredible. So before I ask Mace the first question, Kathy, get us started. Mace, we don't screw around. That's the right kind of an introduction for somebody like you, right?
That was unexpected, and I'm having a bit of a pinch me moment considering the other people's names and photos I just saw. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor for sure.
Well, we are very, very excited. I have a ton of questions for you. Oh, for people that might be new to this, to a Legend series, I'm going to talk to Mace for about 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up for live Q&A. So what you do is just say, I have a question. You don't have to put your question in there. Kathy will tee you up and you ask your question right to Mace. Let's start with, so you grew up in Wisconsin, and I'm a Vikings fan, so I don't just do this for anybody. But I will do this for you. I'll put the cheese head on. Grew up in Wisconsin and small town, and decided, I think a little later on, that you wanted to be either in the CIA or the FBI. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting career choice. And then you decided on the Air Force. Tell us a little bit about, first, why would you choose FBI, CIA? What was the draw? And then what got you on the path into the Air Force?
Yeah, I like that question because I think when I was on the Thunderbirds, a lot of people assumed that I grew up, going to air shows as a child, and I'd always wanted to do that, but that's definitely not the case. As you said, small town in Wisconsin, not a military family, not an aviation family. So I just didn't have exposure to either very much. As I got later in high school, my parents were, very working class. They're like, hey, we don't have a college fund for you, but I put a lot of time into academics, so I had a really good GPA. So we started looking at scholarship options, which is how Air Force ROTC filtered to the top. But you're right, I went to college as a criminal justice major because I wanted to be an FBI agent. And I don't really know at specifically what moment I decided that's what I wanted to do. I always joke when I get asked about that I really loved the X-Files growing up. And clearly that's the most realistic portrayal of what the FBI does. I think I went through some phases like any kid. At one point I was at archaeology camp and it was hot and dirty, and I decided not to do that. Maybe that was when I decided the FBI was a better option. But I was in Air Force ROTC, so I was going to go into the Air Force as an officer for at least 4 years to pay back my education. And so I planned on going to do OSI, which is like special investigations, 4 years, and then get out and apply to the FBI. Military service makes you more appealing as a candidate anyway. So I was like, cool, got this big plan. I'm 17 years old, so clearly I know exactly, what's going to happen. In Air Force ROTC, we visited a fighter base, I think when I was a sophomore, and it was at Tyndall in Florida. And I saw 2 F-15s taking off from the ramp. So I was close to the runway. They're taking off in full afterburner. It was at dusk. So that afterburner flame is just, glowing orange out the back. The jet noise vibrates your whole body. And that was the first time I had seen fighter jets up close ever. And it was a pivotal moment for me. I got goosebumps. I got this excitement that I rarely felt. And I was like, I want to go do that. And then it was just figuring out how to start checking the boxes to be competitive, because you don't just decide I want to go do that and then you become a fighter pilot. The journey's long. It's about 3 years of training until I was at my first F-16 unit, and the wickets get smaller and smaller as you go through the pipeline to who actually makes it into fighter aircraft.
Absolutely incredible. So this seems like a cheesy question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Because we've all probably watched Top Gun and we've watched the sequel. What's when you watch that, what's real and what's just bullshit?
No, I like this question. I loved the sequel, especially. I thought they did a great job as far as sequels go. The opening scene of the Mach 10 ejection, I was like, oh no, this is going to be crap, because so there's this whole debate with Mark Kelly, the astronaut, on Twitter about whether you could eject at Mach 10 at the altitude you would need to be at to be going Mach 10. The atmosphere is so thin that the jet blast that would rip you apart at Mach 1 at sea level might be reduced enough that you could survive the Mach 10 ejection, but barely. I mean, you wouldn't be walking into a diner just a little stiff afterwards. So the start, I was like, oh no. But then I actually loved the storyline and all the throwbacks and the cinematography. They put a lot of effort into putting actors in the back seats of jets. And so a lot of the flying stuff you see, that's not green screen. They're actually in the aircraft. They're under G, they're flying inverted. And I think you can tell it's really quality flying scenes. And so I really loved that part. And then, when this is a spoiler for hopefully everyone's seen it that wants to, but to go in and do that mission and drop that bomb low altitude and then have to do that pull up and be G limited by the F-18, I was like, you should have made this movie about F-16s, because we could have made that turn no problem. But yeah, other than that, it was good. I don't think the Tomcat that he randomly finds at the end, based on what I know about aircraft maintenance, I don't think you just start that thing up and taxi it out with no problems, but it had to have a nice nostalgic ending.
Yeah. I think the Thunderbirds are, some of us have probably seen Thunderbirds or Blue Angels or something like that, but I don't think we really have an appreciation for what it takes to get one of those spots, what it takes to fly lead solo. And then even, I think I heard you saying at one point, there are times when, was it right? You're like 18 inches or 3 feet from another plane going 500 miles an hour.
Yep.
Tell us just a little bit about that, because some of us have seen the shows, but I don't think we have an appreciation for the people in the cockpit, how they got there, and then what you experience doing that.
Yeah, so we work really hard so that it looks easy from the ground, so that you don't have to think about how hard it is. But it's a battle in the cockpit, and the hiring process itself is pretty daunting and intimidating. From the time I applied, you initially submit a paper application. It's like all your flying records, your physical fitness scores, letters of recommendation, why you want to be on the team. Mine was 40 something pages. Then you get brought out for an interview weekend with the team on the road. So you go to an air show, do some interviews. Then they cut that group in half down to finalists. And then you go back and do another air show weekend for more interviews. And then you finally find out. So I think I submitted my application in December and I found out in July. So you have, 6-ish months of intense, intimidating interviews and stress. And it was super interesting being on the other side where I was helping hire new people, because we didn't always hire the pilots that on paper had the most experience or had the best records. That was one piece.
Wow, unbelievable.
And there was,
what about Glenn? Because
there was a certain level of threshold that you had to be at for experience level, obviously. And if you had glaring things on your record, that would be a deal breaker. But generally, we were looking for this whole person concept that was kind of hard to define to people. And sometimes when you have to call people and tell them that they didn't make the team, they would have a really hard time understanding why, because they knew they were really competitive on the flying side. But that's just a portion of being a Thunderbird. A huge part of the mission is the public facing side, the inspiration side, the being put on, TV cameras and interviewed side. And sometimes the best pilots aren't the best in that area. And so you have to find this unique balance. And then the other part is creating this team where 6 of us are airborne for every demo. It's always the same 6 people. We don't have any backup pilots. And then there's 12 officers total. And you are with those people on the road 240 days a year. Wow. So you are seeing them more than you see your family. You're in intense situations, you're in stressful situations. And so a lot of time goes into handcrafting this team where personalities are going to jive the best. So you can't have someone that just is going to be a conflict with other people, because it turns into a poison in the well. And a lot of energy can end up going into that instead of what it should be. So you have that side. And then the flying itself, I've been flying the F-16 for 8 or 9 years when I started coming to the Thunderbirds to fly. And it was hard. It was the first time since pilot training that I had felt kind of, we call it the helmet fire, where you imagine smoke coming out your ears while you're flying, where you're just like task saturated. I'm working as hard as I can and I'm still struggling at this. So you have about 4 months in the winter from being a new Thunderbird pilot till your first air show. And we would fly as many as 10 times a week. And it's a building block approach. So you start going out with just one other jet. You start a lot further away. You start at higher altitude, so you have a buffer, and you start getting closer and closer and lower until by March or April, you're flying, like you said, 3 feet, a few maneuvers 18 inches apart, and then at 100 feet above the ground, which is lower than we ever fly in any other squadron for sure.
How do you build, trust, I think, in business is so important. And obviously trust in what you're talking about is literally life or death. How do you build that? Or is it just do you just innately trust them? Or is it something that builds over time?
There's some of both. Some of it definitely has to be built over time. I think there's a baseline level because the application process is competitive, because everyone that ends up on the team really wants to be there. It's not like anyone's forced to be in that position. And because there's a minimum experience level, so you already know they're an experienced fighter pilot. And, outside of the Thunderbirds, we already have to have a lot of trust in each other with various pilots, even, air-to-air refueling or whatever, someone that's not a fighter pilot. So there's a baseline level of trust there that's probably fairly high already. But the Thunderbirds takes it to an entirely new level. And especially when half of the pilots that you see at any given air show are new every winter. So we have a 50% turnover rate every year, which is mind-blowing to people. And I think there's a lot of parallels there with business and all the shifting that's going on right now. And the way that we're able to do that is you have this common mission that everyone is bought into for some of the reasons I already mentioned. Like, they want to be there. They're enthusiastic about it. They're handpicked. So that's, everyone's on the same sheet of music. But then we have really detailed like procedures and SOPs that everyone is expected to know and understand before they even take off for their first flight. And so we have this common language that we already are operating from. So that helps a ton. But then I think what makes us really unique is we're really big on immediate feedback and accountability. And so the standards are made very clear through these SOPs, like down to the knots, the altitude, the bank angle, the G's, everything is listed there. We have a recording of our cockpit footage that we look at after every flight, along with a video from someone on the ground from the airshow viewer's perspective. And it's like a tape playback for an athlete. We sit all together afterwards, we go into a debrief, and we run that entire demo minute by minute. And what's unique is before your maneuver is up. So as a solo pilot, sometimes the next maneuver would be just me and my aircraft alone instead of the whole formation. And before my maneuver is going to play on the screen and everyone's going to see how well it went or how poorly it went, I get to talk and I get to say, I entered a little bit slow. I was late to do this. I fess up to all the mistakes I made, and then we watch it. And then the experienced pilots, if I was a first year person, the experienced pilots would give, instructional fixes there. And so everyone is expected to fess up to mistakes, and there's no like shaming or blaming around it. It's just, this is what we do. And it's done in a way so that we can learn from it and make the team as good as possible.
I wanted to ask you about that because I was thinking about it before we got started, and mistakes never being overlooked makes sense in what you do. And I just thought, in business, it's so not that way. Mistakes are overlooked all the time, and people are never told that they have spinach in their teeth or anything like that. And we're doing people such a disservice. Like, it's hard to grow when you're not even aware of the mistakes. I don't know if how can we apply that mindset of no mistake is overlooked because it's life or death? And how can we apply it to business? Because I think if we did, we would have businesses that are thriving rather than surviving.
Yep. So it has to be a cultural shift. So it can take some time, and I think it has to come from the top down to create this organization where people have the psychological safety to admit their mistakes without worrying about that, like ridicule, people talking behind their back, all of that stuff. And you have to make sure you crush that in the entire organization. Otherwise, people aren't going to feel like they can do that. I think another thing that's unique that we do that could really help apply it in the business world is that feedback goes up and down regardless of your rank, which surprises people because you think of the military as a very rank structured organization, which it is, but in a flying debrief, the rank comes off at the door. So to try to summarize it, you might have a 4 aircraft flight, not in the Thunderbirds, but in just a normal gray squadron. And it could be led by a captain, someone who's in their late 20s, has been flying the jet for 5 years. They're the flight lead. So they're airborne. They are given the responsibility and the empowerment to make all the decisions real time. Stuff's happening fast. No one's questioning them airborne because you just don't have time to do that. But then in the debrief, they're the one leading that discussion and highlighting what went wrong. And so the other 3 aircraft can be flown by people of various ranks. And that might even include a 1-star general who leads the entire base because he's busy with leadership and strategy. So he doesn't fly that often. So he's no longer the best tactician because he has the big picture. So he's no longer the best hands-on pilot just because it takes a lot of repetition to stay proficient. So he might be flying as a wingman, and those guys tend to make mistakes because they just don't fly that often. And so if I was that flight lead in my late 20s, I would stand up there and be like, okay, sir, I'm still going to say sir. So it's done in a respectful way. But sir, I think you had that guy on your radar and you missed targeting him. That was your responsibility. What were you seeing then? What happened then? What was going through your mind? And on his side, because he's been part of this culture forever and this is just how we do it, he's going to be like, yep, I misprioritized this. I totally missed that radio call. My altitude was looking at the wrong thing, whatever it is. And he's just going to openly talk about what he did wrong. And I'm going to do the same thing as the flight lead, even though I'm in the leadership position for that day. And so you have this open flow of feedback up and down, regardless of rank. And it just creates this really amazing culture. And I think the way we're able to do that is when people stray away from it, they're immediately corrected back before it becomes a big problem that starts to permeate throughout the organization. So like the cardinal sin would be hiding something that you did wrong in the aircraft. And if someone found out about that, you would immediately be talked to and be like, hey, that doesn't fly here, because that starts to grow if you continue to do that, and that gets people killed. And so it's corrected immediately.
Yeah, that level of accountability is unbelievable. One of the things that you talk a lot about is imposter syndrome. And I think what's fascinating, I mean, we have pro athletes on here, we have best-selling authors, we have rock star CEOs, we have gold medal Olympians. They all suffer from imposter syndrome. So you talk a lot about that, and I think it's kind of tied into another central message that you talk a lot about, which is controlling fear. Because I think if you feel like you're an imposter, then you by nature are going to have fear. So talk to us a little bit about those two things.
Yeah, I think you are all in a unique position to see that from a lot of impressive people, which is one of the reasons I really like to share it with people, because it's unexpected. They look at the blue show suit, perfectly fitted, the perfect formations, and they're like, oh, she must have just been one of those people that has it all figured out and is, took to flying really naturally and just coasted her way into being a Thunderbird pilot. But I was super shy growing up. I'm still fairly introverted, but here I am, a keynote speaker. And I realized over time that it was okay to have those feelings and that I could still take action even with them. And sometimes they were so powerful that they would keep me from going after things that I knew I should go after, especially when I was younger and didn't quite have the perspective on it. And I was really able to make that shift to get away from that point where I was like paralyzed by it, by just starting to take small, bold actions that felt uncomfortable. And I think that's the gateway, is just doing it in small ways. It's raising your hand in a meeting and sharing your idea. It's going and introducing yourself to someone when you tend to just be a wallflower. It's little things like that. When you start to force yourself to do it, just like you'd force yourself to go to the gym, over time with repetition, your muscles get stronger and things that felt hard at first feel easy for you. Over time, your level for discomfort, your tolerance level, goes up and up and up. And all of a sudden, you have the courage to apply to be a Thunderbird pilot, which a few years prior to that, I would have never imagined that I would even consider doing, because I didn't think I was good enough to be part of the team, because I had imposter syndrome and self-doubt. But I made a conscious decision that I was going to work on growing in that area. And I would say over probably 18 months, it actually happened fairly fast. The person I was at the beginning to the end was just completely different as far as personal growth.
It's crazy, because you and I met a while back, and you were kind of just getting started, and now to see how much success you've had and how incredible you are on a stage and the following you have on social media is, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, you kind of knew it was going to happen. I remember that first conversation. I'm like, oh yeah, she's going to kill it. How is the transition to be an entrepreneur? Has it been what you thought it was going to be? Because you didn't have to make this transition.
No, I decided by choice to leave active duty. And then I decided more than that to take a non-traditional path afterwards, because most pilots that leave the military become airline pilots. And obviously the airlines are hiring like crazy and their pay is going up like crazy. So people are like, why are you not flying for the airlines? I think for me, being on the Thunderbirds gave me this opportunity to tap into this passion that I didn't realize I really had, which was impacting other people. And I was in this spot where I could plant seeds of inspiration, which is just such a cool opportunity to be able to do that. And once I started doing that, I was like, this is addicting. Like, to help other people in that way, it feels so good and so rewarding, more than the flying was. And so I wanted to keep doing that. And I got asked, I guess this was about 6 months before I was leaving active duty. I was considering all my options, and I actually had been talking to like a tech drone company about joining their sales team. I've been still thinking about applying to Southwest Airlines, all these options. And someone asked me to speak 6 months in the future, which was after I was out of active duty, so I could actually say yes to it. I started to dig into the demand, the fees, all the things. And I was like, I think I could actually create a business around this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I dove in head first, to say the least. I told the tech company the next week that I was going to go do my own thing, decided to not go apply for the airlines. And I think that worked because it took away a safety net. And so it really forced me to sink or swim. So it wasn't like this half-assed, to use that term, side hustle thing that I could like kind of dabble in. It was like, no, this is how I'm going to make a living. And at the same time, my husband was just transitioning. He's the co-founder of a super small tech startup, so super early. He was just transitioning from his software sales job to the startup full time. So our house was in a very sink or swim kind of situation, high risk, high reward. But it really worked amazing for me because it gave me so much motivation and drive to go all in, to create all that content you see. I do that all myself, and it's a grind, but the rewards have been huge from doing that. And it gave me, I think, courage to step onto stages in front of clients that I couldn't really have imagined getting in front of so early on. I spoke to Microsoft 4 months in, I think. And what's crazy is the speech I give now, it's so much better. It's so much more polished. I'm so much more comfortable on stage. The delivery is better. But they still loved it, and it was still a ton of fun. And I've gone from feeling stressed and like an imposter before I get on stage to now really stepping into it and having a lot more fun with it.
I could talk to you all day. Unfortunately, these guys would be very angry with me if I did, because man, do we have a lot of people lined up. So I just want to preface that with, make sure your questions like really succinct, because we do have quite a few people that want to ask Mace some questions. And we are going to start with Jeff Gamble. Jeff, you're up with the amazing Mace Curran.
Amazing Mace. I've been fortunate to be part of this organization for about 6 months. I've heard a lot of authors. I was giddy this morning waiting for this. I mean, actually, just anxiety. It's like, is it 12 o'clock yet? And so loved it. So here's the deal. So you're up at 40,000 feet, and you passed that threshold of 770 miles an hour. I read it this morning. I'm not that smart. Okay. And then you come back and they say to you, you shouldn't have done that. I read that. And they give you the name Mace. So give it up. Come on. So what's Mace all about?
I knew someone was going to ask this question. I'm glad we're hitting it right out the gate. So it was a little bit lower, but I'll tell you the whole story. I'll try to tell it quickly since we have a lot of questions. So my first assignment in Japan, first combat squadron, just came out of the formal F-16 training pipeline. My second flight in country was dogfighting. BFM is what we call it, but what you would know is dogfighting, one aircraft versus another, air-to-air maneuvering, where I'm trying to get that other aircraft in front of my nose so I can employ the gun against it. And this is a basic mission set that you do fairly often, even though we don't have many air-to-air wars or any at all going on. Let's hope it stays that way. It's just a great skill set. So we did that on a regular basis. And my instructor pilot was in the other aircraft. And I was very young and very new. And I learned to fly the F-16 in Phoenix in the summer. And jet engines perform a lot better in cold air. And now I'm in Misawa, which is northern Japan, where they get a ton of snow. And it's December. And the engine was also slightly different with that one having more power. And so at the start of this flight, I used the habit patterns I had built in the schoolhouse in training. And I pushed the throttle all the way up, lit the afterburner, and then I just left it there, which worked great in Phoenix. Misawa, that did not work, because before I even got to the point where I would roll and start pulling back on the stick to point at the other aircraft, I broke the speed of sound, which I was supersonic, which sounds cool, but it is way faster than you should be going in that situation. And so I'm above the Mach. I do everything else the same as I had done before. So I roll the jet 90 degrees. I pull back on the stick. I hit 9 Gs, which right now we're all 1 G, the force of gravity. So 9 Gs is whatever you see on the bathroom scale today, multiply that by 9. That's what you feel like you weigh, which hurts to say the least. And also the big risk is a G lock, which is a G-induced loss of consciousness, because that force, because you're sitting upright in the aircraft in a turn this way, the force is pushing from your head towards your feet. And so it pushes the blood out of your head. It's stronger than your heart's strength to pump it back to your brain. And so we do some things. We wear a special suit. We do this unique breathing, all this stuff to help keep that up there and to be able to, I guess, keep breathing while you're under 9 Gs. But it's a knife's edge. You're walking the line. And if that G strain isn't that good, you get tired, you stop focusing on it. You're just not that proficient at it because you've only been flying the F-16 for a year. You can G-lock. And other F-16 pilots have unfortunately died because of that, because you pass out, your jet impacts the ground before you come back to. So it's a serious threat, and it's really driven home how big of a deal it is. And so we get taught all these things, and I was ready to pull 9 Gs, but normally in a flight like that, you'd only hit that for maybe 5 to 7 seconds. The jet starts to slow down, the Gs drop. You're able to point at the other aircraft. You're into like the short range engagement with the gun, and hopefully you win and it's over. But I went so fast because I just lit the throttle or lit the afterburner and left it there, that I had so much energy on the aircraft that when I rolled and pulled, I hit 9 Gs, but then I just held it for a full 360-degree turn. So I held it for, more than 2 times as long as you normally would. And I was young and dumb, which later in my career, if I got close to that, I would ease off on the pull. I would pull back the throttle to slow the jet so that would drop. But I was so caught up in, I have to succeed, I have to prove myself in this new career, that I just kept pulling. And so I actually had light loss. You first get gray, where like all the color vision goes away, and then you get darkness and it will close in until you get tunnel vision, until eventually you see nothing. And a split second later, you're unconscious. And I was at the seeing nothing point when my instructor made the radio call to end the flight, because he could tell something was not right. So that's a serious story, tells you a lot about what it's like to fly the F-16, but that also earned me my call sign, because MACE stands for Mach at Circle Entry, which sounds hard to explain to non-fighter pilots. The circle part of it is just the turn circle of the other aircraft. You have to get on their same path in the air in order to shoot them. So we call it circle entry. So I was supersonic at that point when I shouldn't have been. So they named me MACE, Mach at Circle Entry.
MACE is a badass call sign. You're
Thanks.
happy with it, right?
I love how it sounds. It sounds cool, but that was a traumatic day, to say the
I
least.
can imagine.
But
Right.
I have a very, very different view on it now, 13 years later, or 10 years, 12 years. I don't even know. It feels like forever ago. Than I did initially, because I was very ashamed of making that big of a mistake that could have had that serious of a repercussion.
Absolutely crazy.
Thank you,
we're
Mace.
going to Randy in Florida. Randy, you're up.
Very quickly, how concerned should we be flying commercially? Like when you get on an airline, do you feel trusting, or are you like, these people, for the most part, really aren't at the same level that you are? So are you trusting of the system? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't worry about it at all, honestly, especially the major airlines. The people that are flying for American, for Delta, they are pretty experienced and they've gone through a lot of wickets. A lot of them are former fighter pilots. The only time that I have been concerned about it is in some foreign countries on like the little puddle hoppers. I was in Nepal and I flew into Lukla, which is where you fly into like trek to Everest Base Camp. If you ever see any of the documentaries or the shows about like most dangerous airports in the world, it's always on there. So it's at like 10,000 feet of elevation. It's short and it's sloped and there's a cliff on one end and a mountain on the other. And one of those exact airplanes, same airline, same airplane actually crashed earlier this year. And I was like, yep, that checks. So those, foreign countries, the pilots sometimes aren't, and not foreign countries in general, but like more the third world approaching countries, the pilots aren't necessarily held to the same standards and the maintenance isn't the same as it is here. So that's when I'm always like, but I still go do it because I love to travel and it's worth it. But you don't need to worry about it I know there's a lot of weird stuff has happened lately in major airlines here, but there's not really a trend. It's all been different things. You're fine. You should worry more about driving a car, honestly.
When you're in a foreign country, you should just say like, can you scooch over a little bit and just let me kind of take this one and trust me?
I was in the front row on that flight in Nepal, like looking essentially over the pilot's shoulders because it was small.
Right.
And we normally have, mission planning materials, a lineup card that has like all the waypoints, the weather, all this stuff. He had a cocktail napkin that said Yeti Airlines on it with like 4 little waypoints jotted on it. And it was even upside down. So the Yeti Airlines logo was upside down and that was just on the yoke of the airplane. I was like, all right.
A little sketchy.
Thank
Bruce in Oregon, you're up.
Hey, Mace, thank you so much. I have so many questions as a journalist, but to honor time here, I'll ask, of course, one. So what was it like to be in such a male-dominated field? Being that only female fighter pilot in the Thunderbirds and I guess one of 2 who were the lead in demonstrations.
Yeah, so my view on it kind of changed throughout my career, and I think the culture in those squadrons started to shift as well throughout that decade. I think I went through 3 phases. I initially, when I went to pilot training, decided I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I didn't even think about it. Like for me, it wasn't something that I worried about until it started to get highlighted by other people. So I kind of applaud my parents for, sending me out into the world with that view where I don't even think about it. But that's great until everyone surrounding you does, because that part, that's out of the control of how you were brought up. And there were a few times where it was really highlighted to me with comments like, I don't even know why I'm trying to compete against you because they're going to give you one of the 2 fighter aircraft available to check a box, to like sexual innuendo stuff. And that kind of threw me on my back foot for the first few years of my career because I had this hard time figuring out what I wanted my identity to be in this culture. And it's already really stressful, as you can tell from my call sign story. There's already a ton to learn. I was already feeling it over my head, like a lot of people do in the early years of a difficult career. But then I had this additional layer of complexity where it fell on my shoulders to determine what was acceptable culturally in the squadron. Like anytime anything was said that might walk the line of being acceptable, every head in the room would turn and look at me to see how I reacted. And I'm like the youngest. I'm a lieutenant. I'm the youngest in the squadron. I did not want that responsibility, and it shouldn't have been mine. That should have been the squadron commander that was deciding that. So I had that phase where I would say it added to my feelings of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. And then as I got to a really rapid growth period personally, I kind of got to the point where I didn't think about it again. And then we got to the Thunderbirds where it was highlighted constantly, but I saw it as a huge asset because the team's mission is not the same as a warfighting squadron. It's to recruit, retain, and inspire. And that third part, that inspire part, when I was the only female pilot for those 3 years, I could inspire half the population in a different way than my wingman could. Like it or hate it, it's true. I could connect with young women and little girls at a deeper level than they could. And I leaned into that and it was awesome.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Sunny in Arizona, you're up. We could have a potential, another great podcast guest for you here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it'd be foolish to not plant the seed of inviting Michelle to the About Greatness podcast, but I'll leave that for another time. No, what I'm curious about is what you have done and what you continue to do is by no means ordinary, which, you know, is clear you're an outlier in so many ways. But from your perspective and experience, what are the characteristics that make up the very best fighter pilots?
That's a good question, because I think it's always tough to answer that one super clearly, because you have the people in the aircraft. So if you're talking about the best actually in the cockpit, the best tacticians, that is often a different answer than the best leaders. Sometimes they're the same, which those people are amazing, but oftentimes they're not. In the cockpit, I think it's some of the people I've flown with that are just exceptional, have this incredible ability to think very far ahead and manage their situational awareness of what is going on, not only in their own cockpit, but in the entire battle space. So that can be the other assets that are airborne, the people on the ground, where the good guys are, where the bad guys are, what direction they're facing, like as far as cardinal directions, all of these things, they have this amazing ability to just keep track of that at a higher level. And I'm always astounded, because that's overwhelming. And then they also can stay very calm and be decisive and communicate it well. And I think that those are the big keys airborne. Hopefully those people also have leadership qualities. I found that a lot of the best pilots, I almost think that they're like robots sometimes, because they're able to operate in that realm so well that sometimes they lack the EQ side of things. So when they get to the higher levels, they have a hard time having deeper conversations with their people when they're struggling, or like really getting to know them, or with emotional vulnerability. And there's a few that have both that are just incredible, but they're not necessarily the same.
Awesome. Thank you.
Tag in Connecticut, you're up.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Scott, great job. There's so much here. And Mace, thank you for being here. Love your content on LinkedIn. Always looking forward to seeing what you post there. And again, thank you for your service to our country. Means a lot. Kind of have a little bit of a two-part question, but it's focused on that post-flight debrief. So kind of in my world, I'm in education as an athletic director, so working with coaches and teams. And I love what you talked about your next venture, because just what you said, it's addicting helping people. And that's the piece I love, working with coaches and kids and just seeing them translate in everything that we teach them over time, even if it's unsuccessful effort, being able to succeed. So the first part of the post-flight debrief, listening to it, one of the questions I had, how quickly is it when you're on the ground and you're out of your plane? Are you in that room breaking down that video? Listening to it sounded like it was fairly rapid.
Yeah. So we generally are given just enough time to probably use the bathroom, grab a quick snack, and then look at our tapes. So we generally prepare individually beforehand by pulling up our cockpit recordings and jotting down like things that went wrong, things that we need to focus on. So we know, because you generally have a good idea, like, oh, that part didn't go great, but things happen so quickly that a lot of times you'll be like, I know that didn't go well, but I don't even know why or how or what happened. And so we would take the time to prepare a little bit in advance and do our own little mini tape review. But I would say it's about an hour after landing. Okay. So it's pretty quick.
I was just curious, like in a sport like football or something, like usually there's maybe it's the next day you gather back with your team and you break stuff down. There's a small stuff there. And obviously you guys are the best of the best. And I'm talking about a range of kids that could be 14 to 19 years old with different levels of experience and concepts there. But how do you deal with one of the things that allows the kids to do is let go of some of the emotion, so that emotion isn't in the room immediately after a contest. So can only imagine, I can't even imagine what your heart's pumping and everything that's going through your mind when you're coming in. How do you manage that component of the emotions running through and going in that room with that? Well, you know, you've got that safety net too, in terms of how you guys operate with feedback, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that part is key, right? Like I definitely had flights where things did not go well and I landed feeling frustrated and embarrassed by how I did and all of those things. And then you kind of had that dread in the pit of your stomach going into the debrief, because you're like, everyone else in the flight might not have realized how bad it was going in my cockpit, but now they're about to see it. Like there's nothing between us. It's open kimono. Here we go. And it can be really scary and unnerving when you're new to the culture. But I think we quickly pull people in and make it very clear that this is why we're good. This is how we operate, is because we're willing to look at this stuff. And when you see that you're performing poorly, you need to feel driven to learn and take feedback and grow from it. But you need to let go of those feelings of letting yourself spiral where it starts to affect future performance. And so compartmentalization is really emphasized to us from a young point in the field. We're like, hey, stuff's going to go wrong. Stuff's going to go wrong multiple times throughout pretty much every single flight, varying degrees of seriousness. But you need to just be like, well, that happened. I corrected it. We can't dwell on it. Like, what's the task at hand? Because you can never afford to have your mind wander in the cockpit back to a mistake that you made, because serious stuff is happening in front of you at any given moment that you need to be paying attention to. And so I think that being emphasized airborne so much really helps on the ground as well, where you're like, okay, that did not go great, but like, that already happened. I can't undo it. Let's take where we are now and do the best thing possible with it from here out.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that forward-looking mentality is so important. Laura in Connecticut, you're up.
Oh my God, I'm like on the verge of tears and excitement. I am honored and in awe, because as girl power, you think of doing what you actually did. Amazing. And thank you for this opportunity, Scott. I have a simple question. What is your go-to skill when doubt or insecurity settles in?
I love that. So I think I've worked really hard to recognize it and not go down that slippery slope. So I think, I don't want to say just creating perspective, but that's a lot of it, is working hard to reassociate that with getting caught up in it and letting myself dwell on it, to being like, oh, I know what this feels like. I know where this goes. Like, what is the alternative to dwelling on this self-doubt? And I often ask myself, what is the worst case scenario? Like, what, by going and doing this thing, what is the worst thing that could go wrong? And I think I'm a little bit of an advantage, because asking myself that on the Thunderbirds, the answer was a fiery crash. And asking myself that now as a speaker and an entrepreneur, it's always, once I like actually lay it out, I'm like, oh, I could get on stage in front of this huge company that I've always wanted to speak to. I could forget what I'm saying. I could stand there for a second and pause while I collect my thoughts. Is that bad? No, I will forge ahead. And even if I skip a section of my script that I've memorized, they will never know, and life will go on. And they wouldn't have brought me there if they didn't already see my background and see what I'm talking about and think that it was valuable. And then I look at the other side of it. I'm like, what is the best case outcome of going to do this thing? And I almost always see that drastically outweighs the small chance of the worst case scenario happening. And so I think just consciously creating that perspective and catching yourself, it's huge. And you can do it over and over, because doubt will creep in. I don't think that ever completely goes away.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, we've got 6 minutes, 3 questions in 6 minutes. Alex in Florida, you're up.
I am in awe. I just have to say that again. If people don't tell you that daily or weekly, they should definitely. you put an awesome video on LinkedIn the other day where you were doing some loop, like literally like inverted. You were looking to your right, and everybody's you weren't even looking for it. I'm like, what is going on right here? And you said a great quote. You said, like arrogance is poison in the well of accountability. So you were saying like confidence is required, but arrogance is the enemy. And I was like, that is such a great quote. It made me think to that like scene in Top Gun where like Tom Skerritt's like, you think your name's gonna be on the wall? And he's like, yes, sir. And he's like, oh, that's pretty arrogant considering the company you're in. So I guess my question is, where do you think the line is from where confidence becomes arrogant? And I imagine maybe yourself, you felt it, a little twinge of arrogance in your career, or maybe been around others that were arrogant. So tell me how you define it, maybe where you see the shift from confidence or arrogance to confidence.
Yeah, that loop video from the Delta loop, exactly like you said, everyone flying on the wings is looking at the aircraft next to them towards the middle. And then Thunderbird 1 leading the formation is looking forward. He's the only person that sees the whole picture. So that whole confidence versus arrogance thing came actually from possibly my most popular LinkedIn post ever, which was criticizing the Top Gun Maverick movie. And people got really mad. And so it did really well as far as traffic. But I said something in there that like the new movie is great, very entertaining, but it's also incorrect because they portray characters that are at this high level in aviation as extremely arrogant. A few of them, not all of them, but they have a few characters in both movies that are extremely arrogant. And yes, there's some inherent competition among us, but not like you saw there, not where you're tearing each other down. It's much more of a team player environment. And people got really upset about that. So I doubled down on it with that video. And it's a fine line, right? Like there's some very big historical fighter pilot figures back in Vietnam that really almost were like spokespersons for being arrogant. But I think that's kind of the public facing side. But what you see behind the scenes, what I shared about the debrief culture and about admitting your mistakes, having the vulnerability to do that, let down that guard, that's the part that you have to have. You can be arrogant when you go out to the bars. You can be arrogant when you're talking to people outside the organization. I mean, I think it's character flaw in general, but sure, go ahead. But you have to be willing to drop that facade and let it all hang out there when you're in the debrief to make the organization better. And so I think that's the big defining difference. And you have to be confident though, because you can't spend time second guessing yourself airborne, not when you're flying that fast. Things are happening so quickly. You have to be decisive and be willing to do it and take the repercussions that come with it if it's the wrong decision. But you can't waste time worrying about your skills at that point.
All right, we had somebody else just jump in, so we're going to try to get to you. If we can't, I apologize, but we're going to go to Nancy in Rhode Island, and then we're going to go to Lauren in New Jersey.
I was just looking to ask why you were leaving the military. With such an amazing career and everything you were able to do, what chose you to leave?
Yeah, so there were a couple of factors. One of the big things was that I met my husband when I moved here to Las Vegas, and I have a 10-year-old stepson, and they're very established here. My stepson's mom is here. So my focus went from it not just being about me anymore to how can I be the most involved stepmom that I can, and to move away and leave him behind, or have my husband live here and I live across the country as an active duty service member. You're moving every 3 years. That was just not in the cards. So there would have been an option to go to the reserves and keep flying the F-16 here in Las Vegas. But I realized that I loved the inspiring part, the inspirational empowerment part of the Thunderbird mission more than I loved the flying at that point. I had been flying at such a high stressful level for so long that I was kind of ready to step away from it. It's also very hard on your body. So I was having a lot of back issues, back pain. And anyone here that's suffered from back pain, it can your whole life can revolve around it when it's bad. And so I was ready to figure out a way to fix that and kind of just refocus. And I always want to make sure people understand that the Air Force opened so many amazing opportunities for me. I got to live across the world. I got to travel all over. I got to fly for the Thunderbirds. It wasn't that it was some toxic environment that I hated that was pushing me away. It was that I realized that I had this new thing that I loved so much that it was pulling me towards, that I wanted to figure out how to keep being able to do that. And in a gray squadron, so a non-Thunderbird F-16 squadron, that's just not part of your mission. You're a tactician. You're, focused on our adversaries. You're consumed by that. It's a lot. And you don't get to do the interactions with kids. You don't get to inspire other people. And I selfishly wanted to keep doing that because I loved it so much.
Thank you so much. My regret is that the Rhode Island Air Show, I'm out here in Rhode Island, is no longer going on right now. And I'm like, I'd love to take my boys to an air show. And I sent you a message. There's a great conference I'd love to introduce you to, because Scott's all about introductions. Like, how can we add value back to our speakers? So there's I'm an HR geek. So there's a conference coming up that I'd love to figure out how to introduce you. So please,
Amazing.
I'd love to continue the conversation offline. Thank you
Let's do
again.
it.
Amazing
sure.
session. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Mace, I want to be cognizant of your time because I know you're insanely busy. Do you have time for 2 more questions, or do you have to jump?
No, I'm good.
All right. Lauren and then Ivor, you guys are up.
Awesome. Hi, Mace. This is Lauren. Thank you so much, first of all, for your time and sharing your story. Really appreciate it. My question is, as a father of 2 teenage girls, I'm super curious if there was one moment or one influential thing that your parents did or that you think a dad should absolutely do to help their daughters with building their confidence.
Yeah, I don't know if it was one specific thing. I think for me, I was really close with my dad growing up, and I mean, I still am. He never treated me any differently because I was a girl, as far as his huge hobby is hunting. So I grew up as a 6-year-old girl traipsing through the woods in Wisconsin, deer hunting with my dad. I went along as soon as my legs were long enough to traipse through the brush. I went every year, and I absolutely loved it because it was this quality time I got to have with him. And it also gave me, I was, again, in this group that he was with, I was one of, I think, maybe 2 girls or women. And it also gave me, a little bit of confidence in that realm, that I could, hold my own, that it wasn't as intimidating as you might think it was or whatever. And him just, I was being there and being supportive was huge. So I don't think there was one defining thing. I think it's just being that positive role model and being there and showing them that you can be a masculine male without that meaning that you're superior to women, or that comes at, putting other people down, or that comes at there's all this stuff about toxic masculinity and all that stuff out there right now. And I think people that really understand it, a lot of people that have daughters, they realize that masculinity doesn't have to be toxic. Like, it's very powerful and there's a place for it. And I think it's just demonstrating to them healthy, respectful relationships. It's also important. So that was a very long-winded answer because I can't be like, it's this one thing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. All right, Ivor, you're our cleanup hitter. You're up.
Thank you very much, Mace. So amazing to meet you, and it's been such a pleasure. And my question, going back to the story you told when you got your call sign, and when you're dealing with the G strain, and you mentioned a unique breathing system that you utilize, and I'm wondering if you could share more about that, and is it something you use in other parts of your life and something that can be applied to all of us as well?
Yeah, for sure. So it's the G strain and the G suit are like the 2 things that keep you awake, essentially. That blood gets forced out of your head. The G suit is like a giant blood pressure cuff. Imagine a pair of, they almost look like snow pants that fit on your lower body, but they have air bladders in them. So they inflate under G, just like a blood pressure cuff squeezes your bicep. They squeeze your entire legs, both your legs, and help push that blood up. It's like a tube of toothpaste. It's kind of gross if you think about it. I feel like you're like, oh great, I'm a tube of toothpaste. But the G strain is important because it allows you to take this breath right before that force gets put on your body, and then do these little tiny air exchanges every 3 seconds. Because if you just breathed out like you would normally, your lungs would deflate and they aren't strong enough to get air back in under 9 Gs. So you would be running out of air. You would for sure G-lock. So I think you can actually see a video on my LinkedIn maybe 3 weeks ago. I think on a Friday, I posted the video from my centrifuge, which is that spinning capsule at the end of an arm that you see in some movies. There's a video of me under 9 Gs. You'll see me doing the G strain. You'll see me age about 50 years in a split second. Very awkward, but it's fun to share with people. So go check that out. But I think it really shows you how you can breathe through some pretty stressful situations. And I use it now with speaking. Before I get on stage, I get nervous. Now it's getting better. But at first I would get really nervous, like dry mouth, just anxiety type feeling. And I'm like, oh, I'm about to be in front of all these people. They're all going to be quietly staring at me. Like, that's terrifying. But just that second of like center and focus of taking a deep breath, it can make or break your mindset, I think, when going into those situations.
Thank you so much. Really been an honor and a joy. Scott.
Incredible. Mace, this has been really an unbelievable hour and a total honor. You are a complete outlier. So you fit right in here. We're a community of about 600 people in 36 countries. So I saw Kofi's here. He's in Togo. We've got Switzerland. We've got Spain. We've got people all over the place. How can we support you?
Yeah, I mean, I am first super impressed by this organization. You have brought together such high caliber people that are all like growth mindset focused. I just love that so much. So I have my kids' book coming out, like you mentioned. It's about a little girl who wants to be a fighter pilot. It's called Upside Down Dreams, same name as my company. So if you literally Google Upside Down Dreams with my name, you'll find it. And then speaking is honestly how I make a living now. Like I said, I jumped in head first, and all that LinkedIn content you see, all the work that goes in behind that is because that's probably where 80+% of my business comes from. I have 6 speaking bureaus I work with. A fraction comes from them. Most of it is someone who sees my content randomly, often people who don't even follow me. They see it through a connection. They start looking at it and they're like, this story could help my team. This story could help the people in my organization. And they send me a DM, and next thing you know, a month later or 2 months later, I'm speaking there. And so if you have any events like that, if you have people that are event planners or are in rooms where names get thrown around, I would love to at least be considered. And I really am in a spot now where I, despite my imposter syndrome struggles, I do think I can bring value with my speaking, and I love doing it.
So we're definitely all buying your book. We're definitely all leaving Amazon reviews.
Yes.
And we will all put a ton of thought into, who we know that has a conference out. Your story is so unique. It's a no-brainer to have somebody have you on stage. So again, I just wanted to say thank you. This has been absolutely amazing.
I feel honored. Like I said, the company I'm holding among the other people that you have had speak, it's definitely an honor. And this is such a great group of people.
Kathy, do you want to take us out with the video again? That's always a good way to Thanks again, Mace. You're the best.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. It was great to meet all of you.